Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. This one is about the most commonly asked questions on defense. So please, first of all, remember that these are not a set of questions which are given to the defense panel members. So this is not the only questions they will be asking. There are a lot of chances that they will ask other questions as well. So please remember that this is only my guesses based on my observation and experience that I have seen on Defense Day. So there are chances that questions will be out of these questions as well. So don't think that this is some kind of a guideline given to panel members as well. It's not so. So let's begin with the common questions. First of all, they will ask, for example, what is the contribution of your study? So the contribution is also referring to the significance of your study, which you have already defined in the first chapter of your final project. Tell us who is going to benefit from your results. What difference does it make in the company? Why should anybody read your research study, etc.? So these are some of the contribution of your study. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers for such questions. You need to be creative, you need to be very skilled and be able to communicate well how your final project is good, why should people study that, etc. Question number two, why did you select this topic or how did you come up with this topic? These are some of the questions that you can be asked. So then tell them the whole process of the preliminary data gathering procedure. So if your research is an applied research, so tell them the process of how did you identify that topic or that research gap. So of course, depending on how did you come up with that topic, explain it. Be honest. If your group member is working in that particular organization, or you yourself is working or was working in that organization, and then you observe the whole situation, then you referred and conducted some informal interviews from the manager or whoever was responsible in that organization. You ask them about what could be the root cause of that problem, and then you refer to literature review in order to see whether there are any supporting materials for that or not. So this is the whole process of how you come up with a topic. For the basic researchers, of course, because basic research does not always rely on some problem, so it's just for generation of knowledge. So tell us, how did you identify that? Did you come up with a or come across with a research paper which got your attention, which made you interested in that specific area of research? So you have to define that whole process. Question number four, name a few researchers that you have referred in your study. This is some kind of question that you will be asked on Defense Day. So make sure you remember some of the prominent names that you have used in your research, specifically those who have a direct link with your study. By link, I mean, for example, let's say you have a variable called customer satisfaction. Now, because this is one of the variables of your study, this is the prominent aspect of your final project. So make sure you remember some of the researchers who have supported this customer satisfaction as a variable which is influencing something or being influenced by something, depending on the study. Make sure you memorize some of the names of the researchers along with the year of publication, and also make sure there are some updated years from the 20s. Question number five, what is applied or basic research? Now, they will not ask anybody who, for example, if you are conducting an applied research, so of course you have mentioned that in the third chapter of your study. So then if they see that you have mentioned applied research, so they might ask you that, what do you mean by applied research? So then you will define that applied research is based on a situation, on an ongoing problem, which needs a solution or an improvement. So that's why it's called an applied research. And then basic research is just for generation of knowledge without the existence of any particular problem. So that will be enough for you to describe it. But again, if you can see in the brackets, it depends on the nature of your study. So if your research is applied, they will not ask you what's basic research. Same thing, if your research is basic, they will not ask you applied research. They will only ask questions that are related to your final project. Question number six, What's a systematic literature review? And question number 7, how did you keep your literature review systematic? So when we say systematic literature review, first of all, literature review is like an ocean, which I also mentioned in the class. There are millions and billions of research papers. So how did you make sure that whatever research papers that you were reviewing are actually relevant to your study? So the best answer for that kind of a question is that you kept revisiting your research questions and objectives, the concepts and variables of your study, which ensure that whatever literature review that you are reading or reviewing, they are related to your study. That's what we mean by a systematic literature review. Question number 8, what is your research design? Again, depending on your study, so you have to tell them that whether it's exploratory or qualitative, or is it explanatory or quantitative. So make sure you explain that. Also, research design and research methodology, they mean the same thing. So they might change the word from design to methodology, so don't be confused. But remember that there is another thing called research method, which entirely refers to the data collection method. So if somebody asks you what is your research design, you can tell that it's qualitative, let's say. And when they ask you what is your research design, so then you should say that it's interview, which refers to your data collection method for the study. Okay, question number 9, how did you select your sample size? So again, this is something you have already defined in your 3rd chapter. Now, the answer to this kind of a question will differ depending on the nature of your study. So let's say for those students whose population size is known. So for you guys, I'm pretty sure that you have referred to the Omicron book and you have figured out what sample size would be adequate for what population size. Same thing for, let's say, qualitative students, because generalization or generalizability of the results obtained from sample is not to be generalized on the rest of the population, because you do not seek generalizability. So for you, the sample size will be determined, let's say, either on the saturation of the data, or because it's an in-depth analysis. So according to some researchers, let's say 6 to 10 respondents is more than enough to have an in-depth analysis of a certain phenomena. So again, like I said, depending on the nature of your study, tell them how did you determine your sample size. Now, question number 10 is for those students whose population size is unknown. Now, they might ask you, how did you determine your sample size? And let's say they will ask you, what was your population size? And you will say that the population size was unknown. So probably they will ask you that, how did you determine your sample size if the population is unknown? So again, for the quantitative students, when you say that your population is unknown, you need to run a formula, a statistical formula based on the Omicron book, which tells you how much of a sample size is adequate for an unknown population size. Whereas for the qualitative students, your justification will still remain the same. Whether your population size is known or unknown, the sample size for a qualitative research is determined by the saturation of the data or based on some references. Like I said, the sample size is not supposed to be generalized on the rest of the population as per the qualitative research. So that's why you can justify it using some kind of reference. Question number 11, why interview? And question number 12, why questionnaire? So then these are some of the questions which look easy, but then you have to defend it in a nice way. So why do you use interview? Interview is used for like open-ended questions, right? Even it can be used for closed-ended questions, but then that's something that you can use, with a questionnaire only. When you use interview, you're seeking, a narration, explanation to a concept or phenomena. And because, let's say, your research is qualitative, that's why you settled for interview, so that you can do an in-depth analysis of a certain concept, like I said. Why questionnaire? Questionnaire is used in quantitative studies mostly with closed-ended questions. which help you in measuring your variables. Fine. Some of the variables, remember, like I told you that there are some variables which are easily obtained. Let's say total assets, earning per share. These kind of variables can be acquired. The value for these variables can be acquired using secondary data, which is very easily obtained from their annual reports or their websites, financial reports. But for some variables, let's say customer satisfaction, okay, like CSR disclosure, stuff like that, so they will be needing questionnaire because you have multiple indicators which collectively give you the value for certain variable. That's why you can use a questionnaire. Okay, what's skewness and kurtosis? Now here this will need a bit of explanation, so let me go on with it. Here, when I say this is a normally distributed data set, this refers to the mean of the data. And when I say that it's the both sides, the tail is equal on both sides, this refers to the skewness of the data. When skewness is equal to 0, that means skewness, or sorry, the both sides of the data, how much the data is skewed on left and right, that refers to skewness. So when skewness is equal to 0, that represents a normally distributed data. Now, what is kurtosis? Kurtosis refers to how, perfectly the data is in the form of a bell shape. So when we say that when kurtosis is equal to 3, that represents a normally distributed data set. So kurtosis shows the how, pointy head or how flat head or how bell shaped the entire data is. Like I told you, there are other types of data set. Let's say this is a kind of data set. Let's say this is the mean, so here it is skewed a little longer than the right side. So in technical words, we can say that it is negatively tailed or skewed, and this is on the positive side, so this is not a normally distributed data. Whereas a kurtosis shows a data that is like much flat or it's much pointy head. So then you can call this a skewness. The kurtosis could be either less than 3 or more than 3. That represents, how skewed the data is. So yeah, I hope it's clear for you guys. Now let's back to the questions. Question number 15. What is the difference between qualitative and quantitative research? The most common difference is that qualitative research is based on explanations, narrations. It's based on words, whereas quantitative research is based on numbers, measurements, etc. The other difference is that in the qualitative research, we basically seek generalizability of the results on the rest of the population, whereas in qualitative, the main aim is not generalizability of the results, but it's the in-depth analysis or the detailed analysis of a particular phenomena or concept. Okay, question number 16, can we use descriptive analysis in qualitative research? The answer is yes. Remember I told you that we have two kinds of analysis. One is called, in statistical analysis, the one is called descriptive analysis, and the second one is called inferential analysis. So descriptive is just the central tendency and frequency distribution, which can be used in qualitative research as well because there is no hypothesis testing involved. You just discuss, mostly it happens for the demographic variable. So the answer to this question is yes. But if, let's say, for just sake of confusing you, they might ask you that can we use inferential statistics in qualitative research? Now, the answer for that one will be a big no, because inferential statistics, as the name says, it infers, it makes a decision, it involves hypothesis testing. So then the answer would be no, because we cannot use that in qualitative research. Question number 17. How did you determine which analysis test to be adopted? Now this, you have to tell them that you have, first of all, when you say analysis test, you're basically referring to the statistical measures. So remember I told you that in quantitative research, the research objectives and hypotheses help you determine what kind of a analysis test you should be applying. Let me repeat something that I had explained in the class as well. Remember, I told you that we use, arrows when we are developing our theoretical framework. And like I said, that these arrows are not used for, decoration or something. They all have a meaning. So when you have, when your hypothesis says, let's say, that one variable is affecting the other variable. So you're basically referring to a regression analysis. So by just looking into this kind of a variable or relationship, you can determine whether you should be using a regression analysis or not. Same thing goes, let's say your theoretical framework involves a double head arrow or a two-way arrow. So that means not only you will be finding the effect of one on the other, but you will also find the effect like this. It works like this. So then you will be using a correlation analysis. Same thing, for example, if you're doing a comparative analysis of two groups, so then you will be using an independent sample t-test. If you want to compare three groups, so then you will be using one-way ANOVA, and the list goes on. So the answer to this question is that your research hypothesis and research objectives determine what kind of analysis technique you will be using for your data. Question number 18, what is thematic analysis? Thematic analysis is a qualitative data analysis method. It involves coding, generation of general themes, and then at the end of the day, your conceptual model. So it is applied in qualitative research. Point number 19, what is APA? And point number 20, what does APA stand for? So first of all, APA is a referencing style. Remember that. There are like hundreds of referencing styles, but APA is one of them. And what does it stand for? It stands for American Psychological Association. This is just the name of the referencing style. So Cordon University, like the rest of the universities around the world, this is the most commonly applied referencing style. So that's why you will be using APA style referencing. Question number 21, what do you recommend in your study? Remember this I had emphasized in class as well. When you discuss the recommendation of your study, make sure they are directly linked with the results of your study. Let's say you want to find out the effect of customer satisfaction on the sales of the organization. And the results suggest that there is no effect of customer satisfaction on the sales of the organization, which should mean that there are other variables that are affecting the sales of the organization, or not customer satisfaction in particular. So then in the recommendation of your study, don't provide recommendation on customer satisfaction. Why? Because if there is no evidence that it has any effect on the sales decline, so then what is the point of making any recommendation about customer satisfaction? Instead, your recommendation should be strictly related to what are the findings of your study. So if there is any effect, discuss how to improve that variable in order to decrease the sales decline of the organization or improve the sales of the organization. So your recommendation should be very, very particular with your own findings of the study. So let's say for a qualitative student, he or she might come across the fact that a lot of people, let's say, complain of gender discrimination within the work environment. So this is the outcome of your study. So make sure your recommendation should be about the removal of gender discrimination. So how should you be able to, remove this kind of a differentiation or discrimination within the organization? So your recommendation should not be too general. They should be very specific. Let's say I would say that the organization, the policy of the organization should not see gender. They should see the performance. They should see how well someone is working. So it should be gender neutral. So then the chances of having or being discriminated based on the gender will be reduced. So again, I will repeat, make sure your recommendation in the study is not alien to the findings of your study. Question number 22, what is your sampling method in the study? Now again, depending on the nature of your study, whatever sampling method you have mentioned in your third chapter, make sure your answer is also the same. So if you have mentioned that it is non-probability sampling, you have used convenience sampling, so stick to the point. Now it shouldn't be that you say that we are using convenience sampling and then suddenly they see that you in your third chapter you have mentioned purpose of sampling. That will be a disaster, right? So whatever sampling method you have used and you have mentioned in your third chapter, make sure your answer should also match your third chapter. Question number 23, why do we conduct a research? First of all, research is a recurring process. You search something which other people have already done it, and you, by adding some more information or some more aspect to it, you study it from a different perspective. So a research is either conducted in order to generate some kind of information or knowledge, or it is conducted in order to find a solution to an ongoing problem or situation. And why have you done it? So it depends on the nature of your study. Why have you done that? If it's a problem, so tell them that you have conducted the research in order to find a solution to that existing problem, whatever the problem is. Point number 24, what is plagiarism? So most of the students all the time make this mistake that they say plagiarism is the copy paste of information. This is true actually. If you're copy pasting someone's work from the internet or published sources, that is called plagiarism. But that's not the only point which is considered plagiarism. Even if you have rephrased an information completely, still you have not given the credit of from where you have obtained that information. That is also called plagiarism. So copy paste plus not giving credit to the original person is also called plagiarism. Question 25, what is confidence interval? So okay, remember I told you that confidence interval or the acceptable error term in your study is what? 5%. All the time when we say significance value, we are basically referring to the error term, or how much error or how much mistake can you afford in your research. So usually it's a 5%. So when the error is 5%, so then how much is left? 95 is left. So 95 will refer to the confidence interval. It means how much or how confident are you that the result of your study is correct. So then what is confidence interval? The amount of surety or confidence that you have on your results. So for us, a 95% confidence interval is acceptable. Uh, like I also said that in the social studies, when we are studying the behavior of people, so even a 90% confidence interval is acceptable, which leaves us with 10% of error. That's completely fine. In medical and scientific studies, a 99% confidence interval is important, with just 1% of error. So because we are doing like a business study, we will stay moderate. So we will stick to the 95% confidence interval with a 5% room for error. Okay, next question is what is R and R square? Remember I said that R and R square are given in the analysis of regression. In the regression table, I told you that we get 4 tables. We avoid the first table and then we interpret the next 3 or the last 3 tables. One of the tables is called the model summary. In the model summary, you get a value for R and you get a value for R square. The R represents the amount of correlation that exists between the independent variables, and then R squared represents how much of the variation in the dependent variable is explained by the independent variables, all of them. Then we have question number 27. How can readers benefit from your results? This question is also similar to the contribution of your study or significance of your study, so you can mention that. So mostly, again, there's no right or wrong answer for this kind of a question. So you can say that, let's say, people can get awareness about certain subject by reading your final project. Or you can also say that in case of Afghanistan, this would be a new form of research. Hence, other researchers can add more number of years or more sample size and do their research in a different way. So yeah, these are some of the benefits that the readers can obtain from your study. Point number 28. What is normality of the distribution? Normality of the distribution is when the skewness is a perfect 0 and kurtosis is a perfect 3. So okay, so as I mentioned in the previous slide as well, a normal distributed data looks like this. Fine. Okay, this is slightly problematic. Okay, you can remove this part. Okay, so this is the mean of the data set, and this is a perfect skewed data, and the kurtosis is also a perfect bell-shaped, so this will be normally distributed data. This is the characteristics of your data set. Okay, then we have describe theoretical framework. A theoretical framework is a graphical representation of the relationship among your variables. It could either use like this kind of an arrow, this kind of an arrow, or this kind of an arrow, depending on the nature of the relationship among your variables. Question number 30, what is acceptable percentage of error? In your case, again, I would say 5% is acceptable, but for the scientific or medical studies, 1% is acceptable, and for other social sciences, 90%, in medical studies, 1% is acceptable. In social sciences studies, 10% is acceptable. For you guys, a 5% is acceptable. Okay, what does SPSS stand for? First of all, SPSS is a statistical analysis tool for quantitative data, and it stands for Statistical Package for Social Sciences. Question 32, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is testable or measurable statement which could have only two outcomes. Either it could be answered with a yes or no, or with an accepted or rejected. Question number 33, which hypothesis do we test in a research study? Okay, students all the time make mistake with this question. See, in your when you're testing the hypothesis in your study, you have two kinds of hypotheses. All the time I keep saying that in the class as well. One is the null hypothesis, the other one is called alternative hypothesis. Whatever the alternate hypothesis says, null hypothesis is always the exact opposite of it. Usually null hypothesis is in the form of negative, in the form of no relationship, negative relationship, stuff like that, or no difference, like that. So when you're testing the hypothesis, you basically test the null hypothesis. So if the null hypothesis, let's say the alternate hypothesis says that customer satisfaction increases sales of the organization, fine. Now if we change it in the form of negative, it will say that customer satisfaction has no effect on the sales of the organization. This will be your null hypothesis. So you're basically testing the null hypothesis by the significance value, which takes me to the question number 34. If p-value or significance value is equal to 0.05, do we accept or reject the null hypothesis? So if the p-value or significance value is equal or less than 0.05, we reject null hypothesis. So again, I will repeat, when the null hypothesis is the negative one, which says that there is no effect of customer satisfaction on sales of the organization. So when you get your significance value as 0.05 or 0.03, which is less than 0.05, so you reject the null hypothesis. So when your null hypothesis is rejected, your alternate hypothesis will be automatically accepted. So considering this example, so if the null hypothesis is rejected, you will say that customer satisfaction has an effect on or it increases the sales of the organization. So please remember that. Question number 35, describe inductive research. So again, I forgot to mention that whatever questions that do not match with your study, let's say if your study is qualitative, they will never ask you questions like what significance value or error term or confidence interval. They will not ask you such questions. And if your study is qualitative, so they will ask you questions like what is inductive research, why interview, how did you determine your sample size, stuff like that. So inductive research, is the kind of approach or research approach which starts from a specific and moves towards a generalization. Or in other words, you can also say that inductive research means generating a theory out of your research, which is used in qualitative research. Question number 36, can we use deductive research in qualitative study? The answer is no, because deductive research itself refers to quantitative research. So you can never use it in qualitative study. So the answer to this kind of a question is a no. These are some of the tricky questions. They just ask you in order to see whether you are confident enough to stand by your argument or not. Question 37, we can only use questionnaire for a quantitative study, so why have you used it in a qualitative research? Again, a tricky question. Let's say if your study is qualitative, still you're using a questionnaire, so then you should be able to defend it. You can say that there are different kinds of questionnaire. One is that is based on the open-ended questions. That kind of a questionnaire can be used for qualitative study. On the other hand, questionnaire which are based on some scales with given set of responses or closed-ended questions, that can be used in quantitative research only. Question number 38, share the whole process of your data collection. Again, depending on the nature of your study, if your research is, let's say, interview, so tell us, how did you conduct the interview? How did you find out your respondents? Was it on the telephone? Was it physical? How was the whole process? So you have to just define it. Same thing goes for quantitative students. Let's say if your study is on secondary data, so how did you obtain your data from secondary sources? If your research is based on primary data, so tell us, how did you distribute your questionnaire? Was it through Google form? Was it physical? Whatever the process is, you have to explain it. Question 39, what is coefficient? Again, coefficient, okay, I will explain this using an image. First of all, this kind of a question is specifically for the quantitative students. Remember I said that in the regression model you have something called beta naught, then you have beta 1 and x1, and it goes on till the error term of your study. Now this y stands for your dependent variable, x stands for your independent variable, beta naught stands for the constant, and then beta 1 stands for the coefficient. Now, if I have to explain what is coefficient, it means that when independent variable, if one unit increases or decreases, how much change will it have on the dependent variable? So coefficient or beta 1 is that amount of change. So 1 unit increase or decrease in the independent variable will bring this amount of change in the dependent variable. This is what we mean by coefficient. Okay, then we have question number 40. How did you develop your questionnaire? First of all, you never claim that you have developed your questionnaire yourself, because that's not an easy job. Even PhD scholars do that. So instead, what you have to do is, which I have also kept telling you, that it's either you can adopt a questionnaire as it is and then give the reference if it's an adopted questionnaire. But if it's not an adopted questionnaire and you have used multiple sources and you have gathered like multiple sources to identify the indicators, and then you combined them and formed your questionnaire, so then you have to tell them, how did you do that? So either it's adopted, so tell them from which researcher or research paper did you adopt the questionnaire, or if it's a developed questionnaire based on multiple references or sources, so then you have to provide those names from which you have gathered the indicators, information, and then you have combined them all for the questionnaire of your own study. Question 41, how did you identify your variables? The answer to this question is literature review. Only based on literature review can you identify whether the variables are significant or should be studied or not. Because see, do you guys remember in the start of your chapter when you were coming up with your problem statement, Some of the variables you identified from the informal interviews, but then you had to support them with literature review. Those variables which were not supported by literature review, you had to drop them, and whatever variables that had some kind of literature review background, you adopted that in your own study. Okay. Point number 42, what kind of interview have you used? So again, interview has different types, including structured, semi-structured, unstructured. So whatever kind that you have used in your study, in your own study, depending on that, explain. Okay, question number 43, what is a variable? A variable shows measurements. It shows values that keep changing, and it is used in quantitative studies. So this is what we mean by a variable. It involves the variation of numbers and numerics, or it is changeable, as the name suggests. Point number 44, how did COVID-19 in any way affected your project? This is just a general question, does not have any right or wrong question. If it did have any effect on the overall process of your final project, if it made your data collection process difficult for you, so then just give them the answer that yes, it was a problem, we could not meet people physically, etc. But if it did not have any effect, so for that kind of a for this kind of a question, you can say that no, it did not have any effect. Let's say your data was based on secondary data source, so then COVID-19 had nothing to do with your data collection or your final project process. 45, question number 45, is your data time series? Time series is the kind of data which is based on multiple time intervals. So again, if your study is a time series, it involves multiple years of analysis. So then tell them that yes, it is. And then what is time series? Explain it. Point number 46, what is cross-sectional data? Whatever study which is based on a current time period or just one time interval, that is called cross-sectional. 47, what is panel data? Panel data is the combination of both time series and cross-sectional. Time series means that your final project or your research is based on multiple time intervals, and it also includes multiple organizations or countries. So that kind of a data becomes panel data. Let's say 20 organizations, or let's say 2 organizations. You're comparing 2 organizations for a period of 2015 to 2021. That kind of a data will be panel. So depending on the nature of your final project, you will have to answer it accordingly. Question number 48, what does reliability mean? So again, depends on what kind of a study do you have. If your study is qualitative, so then you will say that reliability of the data means, in qualitative research means, how much the data is free of biases of the researcher. And for quantitative students, if you're using questionnaires, so for you guys, reliability means that how consistent your data collection method is. So for that, you use a Cronbach's alpha test to determine whether your questionnaire in a different time interval by a different researcher, if applied, does it give the same kind of consistent results or not. Question number 41, what is the acceptable percentage of Cronbach's alpha? So generally, the value for Cronbach's alpha should be more than 0.7, which is above 70%. And but some researchers also accept a value between 0.5 and to 0.6, which means between 50 to 60% is also acceptable. What is validity? Validity test is used to see how the items of the questionnaire for a specific variable are correlated with one another, or whether the variable that you want to measure is accurately measured by the items of the questionnaire. This is what we mean by validity. So how do you test that? With the help of a Pearson correlation test. Question 52, describe difference between correlation and regression. Correlation shows a two-way relationship and regression shows a one-way relationship. Correlation means that both the variables are having effect on one another, or they have a relationship, while regression means it shows the effect of one variable on the other, irrespective of whether independent variable has any effect on the dependent variable or not. So it's just one-way relationship. Point number 53, can you get the same result using a correlation instead of regression? The answer is a big no. It depends whatever your hypothesis is. If your hypothesis says that we want to find out, or the relationship between customer satisfaction and sales is positive. So this kind of a hypothesis refers to a correlation analysis. You can never ever test this kind of a hypothesis using regression analysis. Same thing, let's say if your hypothesis says that customer satisfaction has an effect on sales performance of the organization, so then it needs regression analysis and cannot be replaced with correlation. Question 54, how do you deal with a missing response in questionnaire? First of all, if your project, if your questionnaire did not have any missing response when you distributed it to your respondents, so then you will say that we did not have any missing response, so we haven't applied any kind of approach. But if you do have or did have a missing response in your questionnaire, so if you remember, there were multiple ways in treating missing responses. First of all, if your sample size was big enough, you would just drop the entire questionnaire. If not, so then you could either assign it the mid value of the responses of the same respondent to other questions, or you could assign it the mean responses of other respondents for the same question, and so on. Point number your question 55, how do you convert a questionnaire in a measurable form? You can do that with the help of coding. When you say, let's say 5-point Likert scale, so this 5-point has its own meanings, right? Let's say 1 represents strongly agree, 2 represents agree, 3 neutral, and so on. So each of those codes has a meaning. When you add your information or punch your information within SPSS, that coding helps you to change your questionnaire into a measurable format. Question 56, what is standard deviation? Okay, let me tell you here. Standard deviation is the square of variance, which means, let's say this is your data set, this is the mean of the data set, these are other values. So standard deviation means how the one value of the data set is scattered around the mean of the data set. This is standard deviation. This is variance. And standard deviation means all the data set, all the values, how much they are scattered around the mean of the data set. This is what we mean by standard deviation and variance. Question 57, why frequency distribution? Frequency distribution is a form of descriptive analysis which is used to find out the minimum, maximum range of the data set. So it just shows, for example, how many people agreed or how many people had what age category, and so on. What is unit of analysis, and then what is unit of observation? So unit of analysis, let's say if your study is about Cordon University, so Cordon University itself will be the unit of analysis, whereas within Cordon University there are different people, right? There are students, administrative team, faculty team, etc. So who are you going to collect data from? Let's say if you're collecting information from students, so then students will be the unit of observation in your study. Okay, that's it. At the end, I have given you some motivation that you have to be very calm, you have to be very confident with your final project. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any, but then make sure you thoroughly read your final project before you go for defense. The more you have enough information about your own final project, the more would be the chances of defending it in the right way. So best of luck.